The evening wind rolled low across the plains, carrying with it the scent of dust, dry grass, and distant rain. The Miles Ranch sat lonely at the edge of the world, a scatter of weathered wood and creaking fences against a backdrop of red stone and open sky. The year was 1864, and life was as hard as the land itself. Caleb Miles stood by the barn door, wiping the sweat from his neck with a faded kerchief. The years had not been kind to him, his back bent slightly, his hair gone gray at the temples, but there was still a steadiness in his eyes, a quiet strength that had seen drought, flood, and loss and refused to bend. He'd buried a wife, lost a herd to winter, and nearly lost his faith during the war. But he still had the land. And he still had his boy. Eli Miles, barely 12, came running across the yard, his boots kicking up dust. "Pa," he shouted, holding up a small, broken horseshoe. "I fixed it, used the hammer and everything." Caleb smiled, his weathered face softening. "You did, huh? Let me see that." The boy handed it over proudly, and Caleb turned it in his calloused hands. "Ain't bad work, Eli. You hit the nail too shallow on this end. It'll slip off when the mare runs." Eli's smile faded a little. "I'll do better next time." Caleb crouched, setting a rough hand on the boy's shoulder. "You already are, son. That's what counts." The two shared a small, unspoken bond, a life measured in effort, not in words. The sun was beginning to sink behind the hills when Caleb noticed the dust plume far off down the trail. 6 riders, moving fast. He narrowed his eyes, setting down his tools. "Get inside, Eli," he said, voice low. Eli hesitated. "Who are they?" "Don't know, but they ain't coming for supper." The riders approached with the easy arrogance of men who didn't fear being stopped. They wore long coats, army gray, Confederate remnants who hadn't laid down their rifles even though the war was over. Their leader, a tall man with a scar running from temple to chin, swung down from his horse and surveyed the ranch like it already belonged to him. "Afternoon," the scarred man said, voice smooth but dangerous. "Name's Reed. Me and my boys are collecting dues." Caleb kept his stance firm. "You're trespassing. Ain't no dues owed here." Reed smirked. "Every man owes something. Land, cattle, or blood, it's all the same to us." The men behind him laughed, dismounting one by one. They smelled of whiskey and sweat, the kind of drifters who followed chaos wherever it went. Caleb's fingers twitched toward the shovel leaning against the porch, but he didn't reach for it yet. "You best ride on," he said, his voice steady. "Ain't nothing for you here but work and dirt." Reed's smile faded. "Then I reckon we'll take the dirt." The first blow came before Caleb could move. One of the raiders swung a rifle stock into his stomach, knocking him back against the porch rail. He hit the ground hard, gasping for air. Eli shouted, running toward him, but another man grabbed the boy by the arm and threw him into the dust. "Pa," Eli cried. Caleb tried to rise, pain screaming through his ribs. "Leave him alone." But the men only laughed. They kicked him again, boots thudding against his side, the sound dull and final. Reed crouched beside him, picking up the old man's hat from the dirt. "You built this place by hand, didn't you?" he said softly. "Must have taken years." Caleb spat blood. "Every damn plank." Reed smiled thinly. "Then it's a shame." He stood, turning to his men. "Burn the barn. Drive the cattle out. Leave the house standing. I want him to watch it rot." The men moved fast, chaos spreading through the yard. Fire caught in the hay before the first lightning of the storm reached the hills. The smell of smoke filled the air. Horses screamed from their stalls. Eli broke free and ran to his father's side, tears streaking through the dust on his face. "Pa, please, we gotta stop him." Caleb pulled the boy close, his breath ragged. "Listen to me, Eli, you can't fight them now. You live, you hear? You live long enough to make this right. But I can't leave you. You will." Caleb forced his son's chin up, his eyes fierce despite the pain. "You remember every one of their faces. Especially his." His gaze flicked toward Reed. "Don't forget. Promise me." Eli nodded, his whole body shaking. "I promise." Reed turned back to them, his shadow stretching long in the firelight. "Lesson's over, old man. Maybe next time you'll remember your place." Caleb's voice was hoarse but clear. "Ain't no place for cowards in this world." Reed's jaw tightened. He hit him once more, hard enough to drop him flat in the dirt. Then he spat beside the body and mounted his horse. "Burn it all," he said, and rode out into the storm. The sky opened up as the men vanished into the horizon. Rain poured in sheets, hissing as it hit the flames. Eli dragged himself to his father's side, clutching his hand. "Pa," he whispered. Caleb's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. His voice was barely a breath. "You live for me, son. You live for this land. Make it remember our name." Then the old man's chest rose once more, and fell still. Eli pressed his forehead against his father's shoulder, sobbing as thunder rolled overhead. He stayed there until the rain turned the dirt to mud and the fire burned itself to embers. When morning came, he buried Caleb beneath the oak tree on the ridge, their oak, the one that shaded them during long summer workdays. He marked the grave with a rough wooden cross and a carving knife that had been his father's. 2 decades passed before the name Miles Ranch was spoken again. The land that once burned now lay quiet, reclaimed by grass and wind. The farmhouse had collapsed into its own shadow, its timbers silvered by sun and rain. Only the oak tree on the ridge still stood, gnarled but alive, its roots deep in the earth that held Caleb Miles' bones. The valley had changed hands many times since that day. Reed and his men had taken it first, but greed turned them against each other. The survivors moved on or died drunk in border towns. The land grew wild, half forgotten. Locals whispered that the ground itself cursed anyone who tried to settle it. Then one morning, before dawn, a rider appeared on the horizon. Alone at first, a dark figure outlined by the pale light of a dying moon. He sat tall in the saddle, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, his horse moving with the steady patience of distance riders. Behind him came others, first a dozen, then hundreds, silent shadows fanning out like a rising storm across the plains. By sunrise, 400 Apache warriors stood on the land that once belonged to Caleb Miles. The man at their head dismounted slowly. His face was weathered, his jaw strong, his eyes the same blue-gray as the old rancher's had been. But his hair was black as night, tied with a leather thong and streaked with desert dust. He wore Apache beads around his neck and an American revolver at his side. Eli Miles had come home. He walked to the oak tree first. The men behind him stayed back, watching in silence. Eli knelt at the grave and brushed away the tall grass that had grown over it. The wooden cross was gone, but the carving on the rock beneath it, Miles, was still faintly visible. He set his hand on the stone, closing his eyes. "I kept my promise, Pa," he murmured. "Took me half a lifetime, but I never forgot." A soft breeze passed through the oak's leaves, like a whisper in answer. He had been found half dead in the desert after the attack, wandering with nothing but his father's knife and the memory of fire. A group of Apache scouts had discovered him and brought him to their camp. He'd grown among them, learned their ways, their language, their silence. They became his family, and in time, he became one of them. Now, they rode with him, not as raiders, but as brothers. A young warrior approached him. "Miles," he said quietly in Apache, "the tracks you spoke of, they led west. I think they're still there." Eli stood, his expression hardening. "Then today the land breathes again." They rode out as the sun climbed higher, the ground trembling beneath hundreds of hooves. The plains stretched endlessly before them, and in the distance, smoke rose from the settlement Reed's descendants had built on stolen ground. When they reached the ridge overlooking the new ranch, Eli pulled his horse to a halt. He could see the men below, ranch hands, drovers, guards. The Miles brand had long since been painted over. A new one burned into the cattle, an R inside a circle. Reed's mark. Eli's grip tightened on the reins. His eyes narrowed. "That's the place," he said softly. The Apache chief, an old man with silver hair and the bearing of a hawk, looked at him. "Your revenge has waited many seasons. What will you do with it now?" Eli drew in a slow breath. "Not revenge," he said. "Justice. My father was a man who built, not destroyed. So I'll take back what's his, and bury what's left of theirs." The old man nodded once. "Then we ride with you." When they descended into the valley, the first thing the ranch hands saw was dust, thick, rolling, unnatural. By the time they realized what it was too late. The Apaches surrounded the ranch in silence, encircling it like a tide. Eli rode forward alone. The foreman stepped out of the barn, a shotgun in hand. "Who the hell are you?" Eli's voice carried steady and low. "The man whose father you buried here. The one your kind beat in front of his son." The foreman's face drained of color. "That was years ago. We didn't." Eli raised his hand, cutting him off. "Don't bother lying. The land remembers. It don't care who pulled the trigger, just who stands where the blood fell." The foreman backed away, looking around in panic. "You can't do this. This is private land." Eli dismounted, his boots hitting the dirt with a dull thud. "No," he said, "it's my land." The Apache warriors stood like statues behind him, bows strung, rifles ready. But Eli didn't need them. He walked through the yard, through the same dust his father had once bled into, and stopped at the front porch. There, above the doorframe, hung a rusted horseshoe, split, crooked, a piece of metal he recognized instantly. He reached up and took it down, running his thumb across the bent nail. His father's voice echoed in his mind, "You hit the nail too shallow, Eli. It'll slip off when the mare runs." For a moment, his throat tightened. Then he turned back to the men. "Get off this land," he said. "All of you. You've got until sundown. Leave your rifles, leave your cattle. You go west, you live. You stay." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The warrior's silence spoke louder than any threat. The foreman nodded quickly, shouting for his men to move. Within an hour, wagons creaked down the trail, the last of Reed's line disappearing into the heat.